with fresh gameplay, insights, and a sweet new trailer. Manor Lords, a game I'm very excited about, has emerged from behind its shroud of mystery today. Following up on its wild success from 2022 at the Steam Next Fest, where over 380,000 players took part in what was, at the time, just the organic city building part of Manor Lords. Well, this trailer puts everything on display, especially, of course, that real-time medieval warfare element of Manor Lords alongside its kingdom management and that crucial city building element that, as we discovered during the Next Fest, and as I'm sure has improved since, was incredibly smooth and incredibly fluid. And as we get some insights into its release, including the fact that it's coming to PC Game Pass, as well as its release date, which we'll see soon, but spoiler alert, is April 2024, we now know that it will be releasing in early access and we'll get to experience it in most of its glory. The trailer itself looks fantastic, city building still looks great, very flexible and fluid, yet also able to adapt to a kind of grid if you want to build one. We see some elements of citizen simulation as well, them going about their tasks, their different needs, sometimes on display. And then in this section, I thought I'd slow it down, because here we get a look at something we haven't seen much of, and that's a policy tree. Tithe, for example, one option. And then here we see a development tree, a wheel branch of sorts, with foreign supplies being the first thing highlighted, followed by this basic skinning, allowing hunters to extract hides, more hides, from wild animals. So different development branches obviously impacting empire development here. We also get another glimpse at some of the customization elements around units in particular. Of course, we've seen some of that before, and we will, as I say, go on to reflect on that a little bit more later in this video, where we go back and look at some of the previous trailers for Manor Lords, just in case you're not quite familiar with it. We'll also delve into the detail a little bit deeper now as we get to the end of this trailer. This trailer was just released, as I say, hot off the press. And to reflect on it finally at the end here, I'd say everything is looking pretty smooth, fairly exciting to me, and I know this might seem a little bit hype-worthy, but finally we have a release date to grasp onto. The 26th of April 2024 on Steam GOG and PC Game Pass. Manor Lords will be releasing in early access, with a Xbox Game Pass console release date at least to come following sometime soon. Let's first talk about Manor Lords the City Builder, which really prides itself on, I think, two things. A combination of being a very organic city builder in terms of placement and growth around places, for example, where you might expect growth, like trade routes, but also one that ultimately allows you to be very free and flexible, and crucially that's modeled on historical realism to its time period. And I think that this was captured really well in a recent interview, this one here, with someone from Hooded Horse, the publishers behind the game, who said that the system fundamentally changes how you plan housing, as each individual home, if given enough land, will also produce a variety of resources, from eggs and vegetables to bread and clothes, and more as your city grows and develops new capabilities. With Manor Lords being a city builder, you can imagine just how much of an impact one detail like this would have on every other aspect of planning, let alone how much more involved and interesting it makes the process of simply putting down a few houses. And we indeed got to experience that and sort of play with that in real time during that Next Fest demo way back in October 2022. I can't believe that was a year ago. It really doesn't feel like it. Speaking of which, let me play some footage, a brief interjection from trailers, which I know can be a bit much back to back, but I'm also not quite sure how much you know about this game. Were you around and playing it in 2022? Are you new to the channel but not new to Manor Lords? Or maybe it's entirely fresh for you. I know there's probably a wide variety. So here's a brief look at my experience with it, again a year ago during the Steam Next Fest. I think that one more example that came through, especially for me, and as you'll see now in the gameplay, was the seasonality of that realism and that simulation in Manor Lords 2. In that same interview from before, they've moved on to say that one element that will significantly affect settlements is seasonality. As time progresses, the weather cycle between, of course, a lush spring, summer greens, etc., changes the patterns of how people live and fight. The average temperature will fluctuate, weather, rain, snow, all of it impacting decisions, and crops, of course. So you've got to stack up so that you can survive through the harsh months. The realistic, they call them seasonal shakeups, add a greater depth to what is a superb, they say, and immersive experience. And at least in my experience, during that Next Fest relatively limited demo, the one that you can see on your screens now, it was just that. But of course it was only the city building element. There's much more going on in Manor Lords to discuss, though to be frank, in just the couple of minutes that we've talked about the city building and simulation side of it, we probably haven't even gone far enough. But I don't want to overburden you with too much detail and all at once. So let's move through, as you see probably the last, sort of the end of my footage here, to talk about the second big element that Manor Lords is presenting itself on. Alongside the organic city building comes a combat system. And it's a combat system that reaches again into realism, but this time into real-time fights, where we have an almost kind of total war level control over what's taking place. That simulation from our citizens that we talked about earlier is now taking place on the battlefield. And I think one way maybe to transition us through to that idea is to go back to that idea of seasonality, where on the battlefield, weather patterns will also have tactical implications, and soldiers will feel the impact of different conditions. Trudging through mud can slow them down, fighting in the rain can significantly change the likelihood of survival, and a unit's past combat experience comes in handy when campaigning in harsh weather to overcome some of those negative modifiers. So again, we see that rich simulation from that city building side come through into the combat. Speaking of the combat, let's move through to that now. These first few clips are from today's trailer, from recent footage of combat inside of Manor Lords, and as you can see with the lighting and the shaders as we talked about earlier, it's looking very slick, especially in comparison to some of the earlier, well, at least the trailer footage and how that was recorded, which we'll look at toward the end of the video. We also see a little bit as we move through about the customization, from forming militia to protect what would be a relatively humble medieval kingdom, up to getting these larger armies and campaigning in what we know will be real-time tactical fights. We caught a brief glimpse of those, which I've slowed down incredibly and will play through twice from that in today's trailer. A brief look. It looked to be quite a large number of armies, units that the player here was controlling. And of course you can see them moving along the battlefield, orders being assigned, the kinds of things that you would expect from a real-time strategy game, where fighting in that real time and controlling that battlefield is super important. There was also this, again slowed down heavily, brief clip about pressing a claim on a region using influence rather than king's favour. And this is of course probably the catalyst for conflict, if it's not just a local rebellion, for example, that needs squashing. And inside of that, we have a diplomatic system here too, with rhetoric, proposals and declarations able to be offered between fellow lords, perhaps, Manor Lords after all. And inside of this we see a little bit of negotiation. And of course we're pulling all of this together from now what I believe to be about 4 or 5 different trailers to piece together an idea about what combat looks like in Manor Lords and how that is accompanied by both that diplomatic system that we just talked about, but also the city building side that I talked about earlier. A couple of details you may or may not know, but again focusing in on the medieval warfare side, how that factors into diplomacy, is that units will essentially be divided into a few different types. We'll take a look at those in a moment, but at a broader level, not just at the diplomatic side, but also around resources and training, you can only give your units and train units with equipment that you actually have. So again, your supply lines, that resource management side, that city building side comes into play, because you'll only be as good as the equipment that you have on offer. And of course we see some customization options here as well in and around those soldiers. Focusing in maybe more specifically on the soldiers and reflecting a bit back on some knowledge that I've talked about before, so apologies if this is repetition. Hopefully it's gone completely out of your mind in the year since you've played Manor Lords. Let's have a refresher on the combat trailer. I think one of the first ones that was released. You can probably tell, given the quality of the footage and the trailer, that it was quite some time ago. We start to see different formations. Firstly, they note individual equipment and stats, again leaning into that kind of, what have you produced? Have you been able to produce armor for your units? Then of course we see formations, here a slightly longer view around dragging, around assigning waypoints and orders, the kinds of things you would expect to play out. Likewise on the battlefield, different army orders from this beautiful charge, which again, considering it was old footage, I'd expect it to look even better now, and reworked animations, which follow just that same sweet story of looking highly refreshed in the most recent trailer, which of course places Manor Lords roughly 6 months out from its release. As we talked about at the start of the video, the game is expected to hit early access on the 26th of April 2024, and that will be on PC. I also maybe slightly glossed over the fact that it will be coming to consoles as well. Of course, we see a heavy integration with Xbox, with Game Pass in the initial trailer. Well, not the initial trailer, but the one that released today. And that, I think, will also be quite exciting news for a lot of people out there. To have that access, at the very least, I'm assuming, into the Xbox console market, although they do say consoles, so maybe more to follow there as well. Overall, am I maybe a bit too hype lords about Manor Lords? You know, I don't think so. From what we saw during the City Builder demo, and from what we've seen with the updated footage since, I think I could be rightly placed. Let me know what you think below. I'll see you next time.